Another episode of the Star Wars Unlimited Leader Spotlight series. As a reminder, this is going to be a series where I take a look at a leader from the first set of the Star Wars Unlimited trading card game and take a look at some of the cards from that set that I think work pretty well with that leader. So when you get your hands on these cards, you can have a better idea, maybe a better insight onto some cool options when it comes to deck building. Without further ado, let's get into today's leader. Go over a disclaimer. We're talking about the Leader Spotlight series. These cards aren't confirmed to be the best cards to be used with these leaders. It's just a personal preference. You might have better options, and if you do, please leave them in the comment section below. But these are some cards that caught my eye. In an attempt to keep this video as short as possible, I won't be going over every card that I personally think works well with this leader, as to not try to make this into sort of a deck profile or deck type of video, but rather a video just showing off some of the cool things this card can do and some of the cool interactions this card can have. That being said, let's get right into the leader we're going to be talking about today, and that's going to be IG-88. He's an aggression and villainy leader. He has the underworld, droid, and bounty hunter traits, and he has an action that you can attack with a unit. Of course, you have to exhaust him, and then you can attack with a unit, and if you control more units than the defending player, the attacker gets +1/+0 for this attack. Then when you have an epic action where you can, if you control 5 or more resources, you can deploy him as a leader unit, and then he's going to have the 5/4 stat line, and he's going to gain this ability. Each other friendly unit gains raid 1, which means that they get +1 attack while they are attacking. So essentially, this deck wants to swarm the field with a bunch of different units and overwhelm your opponent through multiple attacks, and by using them to sort of just overpower your opponent by sheer numbers alone. And that's why he's the aggression. He's an aggression aspect. But also, we're going to go over some other cards from other aspects I think works pretty well with this character as well. That being said, if you're playing him on double aggression, what base could you use? Well, obviously you have Darkened Town, but in my personal opinion, I think you might as well just go for the generic one of the generic bases, because he doesn't really need the extra damage that much. But also, it could be helpful, because when you're dealing that extra damage to a non-leader unit, it could be a smaller unit, taking them off the field and making you that much closer to having more units than your opponent does, right? Which is the condition for his leader aside his ability, right? So what are some units that are cheap and sort of fit into this sort of I'm going to play cheap units over on my opponent? Death Star Stormtrooper. It's a 1-cost unit, 3 attack, 3 power, 1 HP. It's very weak, but also very powerful, especially in the early game. And with his effect, you can swarm out the field with multiple units with this card, because it only costs 1. Technically, play 2 of these in turn 1, and sort of swing in for actually some decent amount of damage early on in the game. Another card that works pretty well with this guy is Admiral Ozzel, and he's a 2-cost unit with a 2/3 stat line. And when you play, he has an action that you can exhaust him and play an Imperial unit from your hand, and it interplays ready. But then each opponent can also ready a unit. This can be a bit of a risk-reward type of situation, and obviously, if you play a really weak unit and your opponent readies a unit and then attacks in with their next action into the unit you just played, they could just take them right off the board, and you essentially gain maybe a little bit of nothing out of this situation, unless of course that unit had some effect from being played or from being exhausted or something like that, or rather from dying or something along those lines. But also, this could also turn the tide of battle in your favor, allowing you to play extra units and having them come into play ready and dealing extra damage for cheap, essentially, because Admiral Ozzel only is a 2-cost unit himself. Though it does take a lot of setup to get used, to actually be able to use, and may not be always the best option for you or for your deck. And as you can see with this video, we have 2 sort of archetypes going on within the different cards we're going to be talking about. That'd be the Trooper keyword trait, and there's also going to be the Imperial keyword trait. And you'll see that a lot of different cards reference one or the other, because I think both of these 2 traits sort of have abilities and cards that actually help out this guy's game plan. So another card you can use is Benthic 2-Tubes. He's a cheap 1-cost unit with a 2/2 stat line. And on attack, another friendly aggression unit gains raid 2 for the phase, which means they get +2 attack while attacking. It keeps your units aggressive like we're trying to play, and cheap. You can also play the Partisan Insurgent. He's a 2-cost unit, 1/4, a little bit healthier. But while you control another aggression unit, this unit gains raid 2. So obviously, again, aggressive on the attack, getting that raid ability, allowing to deal some damage to your opponent. We have the Imperial Interceptor is going to be a space unit. It's going to be a 4-cost unit, so a little bit more expensive. For a lot of the cards we're going to be talking about are going to be pretty decently cheap, but it's really not at all that expensive. It's only a 4-cost with a 3/2 stat line, and when you play, you can deal 3 damage to an enemy to a space unit. It doesn't have to be an enemy, but generally you can be dealing damage to 3 damage to an enemy space unit, and hopefully taking a cheaper one off the board, adding essentially to your goal of having more units than your opponent to activate that ability. Then you can also play for the events. So obviously if you're playing double aggression, then you should take advantage of all the double aggression cards. You can play Rallying Cry, it can be a tactic, a 3-cost event. Each friendly unit gains raid 2 this phase, which means again, if you're swarming the field with a bunch of different units, they all get raid 2, and they're going to be +2 attack while attacking, and you can swing in for a lot of damage, potentially. And then also, again, double aggression. You can play the aggression innate event for 4 costs. You can choose 2 in any order. You can draw a card, defeat 2 upgrades, ready a unit with 3 or less power, or deal 4 damage to a unit. Dealing 4 damage to a unit can take a unit off the field, adding to your goal of having more units than your opponent. Drawing a card is always decent. And then also readying a unit with 3 or less power, because a lot of these units are cheap, so their power is low. But with the raid and other abilities adding in, along with IG-88's ability, your power can actually be more than 3 once you attack, but the ability to ready a card with 3 or less power, then attack in and dealing up to like 5 damage while with that attack is pretty decent. And then finally, well, not finally, but then also some other events is Precision Fire. It's a tactic. It's a 1-cost event, and you can attack with the unit and gain Saboteur, which means they ignore Shield and Sentinel. And then if it's a Trooper, which, again, Trooper units, we were talking about a lot of them throughout this video, and though you may not want to focus on Trooper units, you also can to get a lot of other effects. And then it also gets +2 attack while it's attacking if it's a Trooper unit, so it works in with that sort of idea. And then you can also have the Keep Fighting tactic. It's a 2-cost unit, and then it's going to have the ability to ready a unit with 3 or less power, sort of like aggression. Like I said, a lot of units can have a low base power, but when they attack, their power is going to go up. So you can be readying a unit with 3 or less power, but when you swing in, you could be dealing up to 5 damage with that attack. So ultimately, you can get a lot more bang out of your bucks than some other people who are playing this card, right? So say you don't want to run aggression and you want to do something else. I think command is obviously a great way to play this character because again, you're swarming the field. Command's all about having a bunch of units on the field and having a bunch more resources than your opponent, right, at your disposal. So when you're playing command with this unit or with this leader, you can obviously go for the Echo Base, which is a pretty good option. The Energy Conversion Lab works well too because you get to play an extra unit from your hand essentially for free, I believe, and it's going to gain ambush. Well, maybe not for free, but the point is that you can play a unit onto the field that has ambush, which means you can take advantage of it really quickly. But also, I think that it's completely fine to use the generic base with 30 health because, again, having a little extra health is never really a bad thing. And then you look at some command units here, obviously. Grand Moff Tarkin is a card that always comes up when you're talking about villainous command because he's just so good. When you play him, you can search your deck for top 5 cards of your deck for 2 Imperial cards and reveal them and draw them both. You can search for Imperial cards, again, hopefully some cheaper units to spam the field with later turns. And so it's a really good card that can allow you to filter out those cards you're really needing to see this round or in future phases, right? Then also you can play out some Homestead Militia. It's going to be a generic trooper unit. It's going to be a 3-cost, 3/4 stat line. But if you control 6 or more resources, it's going to gain Sentinel. Sentinel's just a generically good ability, and it's a trooper, so it has that going for it. And then also you can play the Vanguard Infantry, another trooper. It's going to be a cheaper unit this time, though. It'll probably be working towards that game plan. You can play for really cheap. It has only a 1/2 stat line, but when it is defeated, which it will be, it's only 2 HP. But when it is defeated, you can give an experience token to a card that you control. And of course, if you don't know what this experience token looks like, it's essentially a +1/+1 token from almost every other game you've probably played. And it looks like that if you get it in the booster pack, right? That being said, what else can you use if you're playing command? So you can use the V-Wing. It's a 2-cost unit, pretty cheap, 1/1 stat line. But when you play, you get to draw a card. Extra bit of card draw. It's going to filter out your hand and allow you to look for more units that you may need to play this turn or in future phases. You can play the Attack the Event, the Emperor's Legion. It's a 2-cost villainous command event. Allows you to return each unit in your discard pile that was defeated this phase to your hand. It allows you to get some of those cheaper units that had just died back into your hand to use in later turns, because again, you want to keep that flow of units coming. And then you can also use prepare for takeoff. We'll see, we talk about a lot of space units in this, or vehicle units in this particular video. And so this card is simply a lot like some other command cards that allow you to search, but these allow you to search up to 2 vehicle units. And if you're looking for those cheaper units, such as, of course, the V-Wing, the patrolling V-Wing, you can search that out and maybe play it on a future turn, or if this is like turn 4, you can play it this exact turn. And then you also can use Traitorous. Now this is a card that its uses aren't always going to be amazing, but in this deck I think particularly it's pretty interesting because although it costs 5, it's pretty expensive, and it allows you to take control of one of your opponent's non-leader units that cost 3 or less. And for the most part, that may not be a fair trade. It's just allowing you to steal one of your opponent's units that are pretty cheap, cheaper than what you paid for this. But with this particular deck, when you're trying to look to have more units than your opponent, actually this is a +1 on your side and a -1 on your opponent's side, so it's a 2-unit swing essentially for 5. And although that's not may not always add up the way you need it in that moment, but sometimes it really can. It can make the difference between activating that ability, and also can make the difference between possibly winning the game. Okay, so if you're not playing command, you might want to play vigilance, which actually I also again really like with IG-88 because he wants to protect his units. He wants them to stay around and storm the field. So protecting them through the various shield and healing abilities that vigilance has, it's not a bad idea. You can of course use a security complex to give one of your units a shield with that epic action, which is a good choice. I wouldn't mind going for that. And then, so what are some of the units you can actually play, or some of the cards you can play within Vigilance? So you have the 2-1B Surgical Droid. So I put this in here mostly because it's another droid. So I mean, it's pretty interesting, but it also works pretty well. It's a cheap unit for only 1 cost, 1/3 stat line, and on attacking it can heal 2 damage from another unit. And that means that your other units that may be a little damaged can actually heal up and stay on the field longer to help you work with these abilities in this swarm effect that you're trying to go for. Then you can also use a Wilderness Fighter. It's a shielded unit, which means it comes into play with a shield token, which means it's going to stay around for a long time, and it also happens to be a trooper. So it's a 2/4 stat line. It's just a generically good unit. Then you can also use the Distant Patroller. It's a 2-cost unit, a 2/1 stat line, and when it's defeated, you can give a shield token to another Vigilance unit. Okay, it's pretty cheap. It's going to die, as you can see. It only has 1 HP. But when that does happen, you can shield up one of your other units, keeping it on the board for a little bit longer, and hopefully allowing you to swarm your opponent for that much longer. I also like the Inferno 4. It's going to be a 2-cost unit with a Vigilance Villainy aspects, a 2/3 stat line, and when you play it, or when it's defeated, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put any number of them at the bottom of your deck, and the rest in the top in any order. It's allowing you to filter out those cards you don't really need to see at this moment, or you don't think you're going to need to see at this moment. It's also going to look for those cards that you really do need to see to hopefully win you some games, and hopefully stack the deck in your favor for maybe when you're using some of those other effects like drawing cards and whatnot. So then, I actually really like for the event side of things is Power of the Dark Side. It's a 3-cost event. It's pretty cheap. It's a Vigilance Villainy event, and your opponent will choose a unit they control and defeat that unit. Usually this won't be always that powerful, but it is a pretty cheap option and allows you to take a unit off the board, hopefully adding to your sort of overwhelming ability, because your opponent does have to choose a unit, and if they have a big expensive unit, they have to choose that one. And even if they have multiple units, some of them being cheaper, them taking off one of those weaker units can still mean that you can activate IG's ability a lot easier, right? And then finally, I think a pretty good option for this, not finally, but I think a pretty good option for Blue Vigilance is going to be Moment of Peace. So 1 cost, give a shield token to a unit. It's pretty standard, but it it's going to allow you to keep your units on the field for that much longer. And then finally we have for the upgrades, Resilient. And now this is a cheap upgrade with only 1 cost. It gives you no attack, but it gives you +3 HP, which is going to allow your units to again stay on the field for that much longer and hopefully deal some more damage throughout the game. If you want to play IG-88 on Cunning, then you obviously can go for the Jeddah City base, but I also think either one of the 2 yellow generic bases are actually more than enough. I don't think you are always going to need the ability to give a non-leader unit +4, -0, but also it can actually help you out maybe a little bit, because there are situations where you want to attack into a certain unit, but you're afraid it's going to knock out your unit in retaliation. You still need that unit on the board. Well, then this is going to allow you to make your opponent a whole lot more docile. So what are some yellow cunning units you can use? We have Bib Fortuna. He's going to be a cheap unit. with only 2 cost. He's going to be with 1-3, but he is shielded, and also he has a cool action that you can exhaust him, and you can play an event from your hand, and it's going to cost 1 less. This can be any one of the events you may be running in your deck. Some of those aggression events we were talking about earlier that allow you to swing in for even bigger damage, and then it also can allow you to play some more cards after it because it's going to be a lot cheaper. Well, not a lot cheaper, but it's going to be cheaper than it otherwise would have been. And then I really like this Crafty Smuggler. What I like about Cunning on IG-88 is there's a lot of cheap units with effects that really help out when they're swarming the field, right? So you have Crafty Smuggler. It's going to be a 2 cost unit with a 2/2 stat line, but it's going to be shielded, which means it's going to come into play with the shield, but it's really cheap to do that with. You play it down, it's shielded, and then it can take a damage, it can swing a little bit, and it can help you swarm the board that much more. Then you also have the 7th Fleet Defender. I like this one because it has shielded again. It's going to allow you to come in there. It's going to stay around for that much longer, allowing you to use it for that much more. I also like the Mining Guild TIE Fighter. It's a 1 cost really cheap unit. It's going to be a 1/2, but it's going to have this ability that when you attack, you may pay 2 resources. If you do, draw a card. Getting those cards into your hand can be really important. Looking for not searching, but rather looking through your deck and drawing through your deck, looking for those cards you may need is always going to be important. And then, of course, after that, you can look at some events to play with this character, or either with this leader. You can play Surprise Strike. It's going to be a 2 cost tactic event. You can attack with the unit. It gets a +3 power and for this attack, and that's just going to allow you to attack in with one of your weaker units again and make it a bigger strike than your opponent may have suspected. A Surprise Strike. And then you can also play I Had No Choice. It's a pretty expensive card for a lot of these other cards we were talking about in today's video, but you can choose up to 2 non-leader units, and your opponent chooses one of them, and they return that unit to their hand, but then the other one goes to the bottom of their deck. That's a 2-unit swing. It's going to take 2 units off the board. Of course, one of those units they're going to be able to have the ability to play back down again. If it's a unit with a really powerful playability, it may really not be that great may not really do that well for you, but at the same time, if it's a unit where they actually don't want to play back down, or they don't really have any options with units that just get powerful one play abilities, and they're just powerful units in general, then they're just going to have to pay more resources to get that unit back into play. And then, of course, you can play, to finish this off a little bit here, you can play Snapshot Reflexes, always a great card, +1/+1, and when you play it on, you can attack with the attached, when you attach it, you can attack with the attached unit, which essentially gives you 2 actions in one, essentially. And then, of course, you can play Smuggling Compartment. Like I said, we talked about a lot of vehicles in today's video, a lot of ships. And with this particular upgrade, you can attach it to a vehicle unit, and then it's going to get the ability that when it attacks, it can ready a resource. And then also, when you ready resources, that means you can have more resources to play with cheaper units, like we're playing a lot of. We're playing a lot of cheap units, so you're going to be able to play more units that turn, swarm the field that much more. All of this is important. And then we also have some generic dark cards that you may end up wanting to play if you're not, well, depending on whatever aspect base you're playing. Admiral Mahdi is going to be a 2 cost cheap unit. We always like talking about Mahdi. He's pretty good. A 1/1 stat line, but when he dies, you can ready another dark villainy unit. You can play the Snowtrooper Lieutenant. Another cheap unit. It's a Trooper Imperial as well. 2/2. When you play, you can attack with another unit. If it's Imperial unit, it gets +2 attack for this attack. And then you can also play with the TIE Element Fighter, cheap unit, 1 cost, 2/1, sort of like the Stormtrooper, same idea, it's just cheap and with a little bit extra power than HP. And then if you really want to, I mean, it's not exactly the greatest card to ever exist, but you can play the Volunteer Soldier. It's a 3 cost unit, but it gets -1 if you have another Trooper unit in play, and it also has Raid 1, so it sort of helps with the idea that we're sort of building in today's video. But that's going to about wrap up all the cards that you may end up wanting to play with IG-88. Or are there some cards that I personally want to play with IG-88? There are some cards that I think work pretty well with the character, some cards that I think are pretty cool with the character, and some cards that I think are just pretty cool in general, to be honest. But let me know what you guys thought about IG-88, and come back tomorrow for the next Star Wars Unlimited Leader Spotlight, and I hope to see you guys there. Well, that's going to be all for now, but if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys go ahead and watch some of our other videos that we've made on this channel. Also, give this video a like if you thoroughly enjoyed it. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future content. And I hope to see you guys back at the Roost.